A quick disclaimer before the video starts. All of the footage in the video is not my own because I did not know I was going to be filming this video until after I had finished Elden Ring, and there's no way I'm going to go back and replay that all for the footage that I want. So I am using other people's Elden Ring footage off of YouTube, and all of the credits will be in the description below. Thank you guys, enjoy. Hello everybody, Rant here, and I finally finished Elden Ring as the title says, and I've never played a Souls game before, so I thought let's talk about it. Let me tell you, I was Elden Ring's #1 hater up until like last month when I actually sat down and said, I'm gonna finish this game no matter how hard it is. Because I played it when it first came out, and I had never played a Souls game in my life. I didn't even know what people meant by constantly saying, oh, it's a Souls game, it's so hard, blah blah blah. I didn't care. And I should have cared. I saw it being advertised as an open world game, and I was like, yes, that is the game I'm going to play next. I seriously couldn't play the game because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know which stat leveled up HP. I went in that blind. This game is so magical, whimsical, and just absolutely beautiful, but I found myself not being able to enjoy it fully because of how frustrated I would be about dying to the same boss 20 times in a row, grinding to level up, and then finally beating it. All of my frustration with the core game loop took away a lot of the beauty that this game has for me. Like, I loved Estelle's boss arena, I loved his design. The first time I saw him, I was like, wow, this dude is epic. And then after trying to fight him for an hour, I gave up, went to level grind, and completely forgot how awesome and cool I thought he was, because I just wanted to move on with the story. And yeah, maybe that's my fault, but I'm sorry, I wasn't level 140 playing a magic build. And I should have been playing a mage build. But no, Google said, do a samurai build, it's the best for new players. No, it wasn't. That was probably the worst decision of my life. And it's fun once you get good at it, and I wouldn't say I was, like, hardcore epic gamer good at it, but I did get the hang of it eventually. I still died to each boss, like, 10 times though, but I'm pretty sure that's, like, the average Souls game experience. And I've never liked mage builds. I like the idea of magic, but I'm always more of a melee person, and that's just what I gravitate towards in games. Another point is that in my experience, if you don't look things up or have never played a Souls game before, you'll have no idea what you're doing to the point where playing the game just isn't fun, which is what happened to me the first time. And there are so many NPC questlines I would have missed if I didn't look up where they just disappeared to. And nowhere in the game did it ever tell you or give you a hint as to where they went. You literally just have to get lucky and find the NPC and pray you didn't skip or break their questline because you defeated a boss already that for some reason determines the character's questline. And for some characters, I do understand why that certain boss would affect their questline, but most of the time it didn't really make sense. There was just like a point in the story where if you got too far, that character was going to be gone forever. That happened to me with Nefeli, because I remembered she existed, like, when I was almost done with the game. So I was like, oh, where did she go after the round table hold? So I went over there to that, weird village that said that that's where she went. She wasn't there, never showed up again, don't know where she went. Guess she just disappeared or died. And I don't know how people originally found where all these NPCs went, because it's just so nonsensical as to where you find some of them after a certain point in their quest. And yes, I guess exploration, but they are just so obscure. Like, why are you over here? Why did you get there? I googled like 70% of the game because I didn't have the patience to figure out riddles and secret messages, so I went onto the Reddit page quite a bit. And there was some really good advice and lots of really bad advice. Everyone's saying armor doesn't matter, but it does, ? Like, no, it is not just for the cosmetics. I did most of the game in Radahn's armor, even though I was definitely not the biggest fan of it, because it gave the most physical resistance damage of any of the armor that I had. And I noticed the difference immediately when I changed to any other armor set. And then I just die. After I got my vigor to level 60 though, I stopped caring and wore Malekith's armor because it's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, and if you disagree, you're wrong. Sorry. The posts that I had used on Reddit for information are like 2 years old at this point, and if I were playing the game when it first came out, I would have been banned from the Reddit page for how ridiculous people were being, because get good is not a legitimate response to a question. The response to anyone asking for help fighting a boss should have been use Mimic Tier Ashes plus 10, because I definitely wouldn't have been able to defeat the last 4 bosses without it. And I only saw like a handful of the suggestions being like, use the Mimic Tier Ashes. I don't care if you think it's cheating. Use Mimic Tier Ashes, because yeah, it works. It's not worth the pain. Me and Mimic Tier can literally do anything together. Speaking of Mimic Tier Ashes, controversial opinion, I don't know. I use Spirit Ashes in every fight because for me, I would not have been able to beat the game without them. Especially using a melee build, I noticed pretty early that the game was not meant for melee builds, but that's for the next section. I know people have done no summon runs, but any post on Reddit I've seen about people doing no summon runs, they want to die a horrible death, and why would I do that to myself? That's where my issue is, because why is your game so hard that if you don't use summons, the main bosses are going to take you 300 hours to beat? People don't have that kind of time, there are other games to play, and just other things that people need to do. Some people like that kind of challenge, the average gamer does not. In my opinion, without summons, the game is way more difficult than it realistically needs to be, even for a Souls game. And just saying it's a Souls game isn't really an excuse, because, like, yes, you can say that, but it's just a crutch, really. Like, that is, at the end of the day, saying it's just a Souls game is a crutch, is an excuse for a very, very difficult game. And could you do a no summons run on New Game Plus? Yeah, probably, because you're overleveled to the next universe, but starting with a new save, most people need to use summons, and if they aren't using summons, they're using a magic build. Said what I said. So I did the whole game as a melee build. The only time I respect to put more points into Arcane was for Malenia's fight, so I could use the Rivers of Blood katana. And I definitely feel like the game was not meant for being a melee build, because more than half the rewards I got I couldn't use. Most of the remembrances were useless because I was doing a dexterity build with the Uchi katana for 80% of the game, and all the weapons they gave me were for strength builds, or they needed some other random stat leveled up like intelligence or faith, which I wasn't leveling. Even the Rivers of Blood katana I couldn't use until I respec'd all my points, because they were going into vigor, endurance, and dexterity, so that's like half the game content gone for me. And yes, that was a choice I made, that's the build I decided on, but the game should be equally rewarding for melee builds as it is for magic builds, because both of these options are in the game, and if you're going to put both of them in the game, there should be routes for both of these builds. And killing bosses doing melee is not good enough of a reward for me, sorry. The only remembrance that actually gave me something I could use for my build was Malenia's, which was at the very, very end of the game, the last leg, literally one more fight I had left after her, the last fight, and I still couldn't use it because I didn't have enough dexterity. Lots of the bosses were just not melee friendly, or literally tried to force me to play a ranged or magic character. The only fight I cheesed in the game was Nile the Commander, because you can't beat him using melee. At least I couldn't. If they wanted me to use magic, fine. I'll just go shoot some arrows at him from the other side of the castle. But there was no way that I was going to spend a whole day trying to figure out how to beat him with my melee build. My suggestion, and hear me out guys, is that they added more movesets to the bosses, so that way being close to them, you'd have to, like you'd have to be for melee, you'd get those movesets, and if you were further away, you'd get those movesets. And I know they already have, like, a variation of this, but I say add more, or maybe just have 2 completely different variations of the boss, depending on the player's build, which I know is a big ask, but if you took the last 20 hours of the game away and implemented that instead, it could work, guys. I'm not crazy, just it could. And I think that'd be really cool if you had a completely different boss moveset. Like, they were only doing movesets meant for melee builds when you were playing a melee character, and then you had a completely different moveset, like just completely locked out of the melee movesets, and then you just had the ranged movesets. I think it would also add more replayability, perchance. Just a thought. Anyways, justice for melee builds. Here's the big one, guys. The thing every Elden Ring criticizer has something to say about, and I do too. My biggest issue with the bosses actually wasn't their movesets and the actual combat, which, yes, was ridiculous sometimes, but there wasn't a boss I ever felt I just couldn't flat out beat, except Nile, which, you know, whatever. I would get beyond frustrated with some of them. Godskin Duo, Millennia, so. But at the end of the day, if I was fighting them and died 10 times in a row, I just went and leveled up more. Except Millennia, I just started using a blood build instead, which, yeah, Reddit, that was good advice. My biggest criticisms with the bosses is that so many of them repeated. And yes, this has been said before, but I didn't realize how much it would take away from the experience for me once I was playing. I remember the first time it happened was with this giant magma cave wyvern, and I had beat it in a cave the first time, but then I found out it was a legit boss fight with like an actual NPC summon, and I was like, I already fought this guy. The best one was Royal Knight Loretta, who I fought at the Carrion Manor, and she just magically showed up again at the Halleck Tree, and I actually laughed out loud because it was ridiculous. Like, why would she just be there again? The exact same person with the exact same name, but, well, it didn't have the same name. The first one was Royal Knight Loretta, and then the next one was, like, Loretta, Great Knight of the Halleck Tree. Girl, really? I just, why would she be there again? It makes it feel like there wasn't any intention behind the bosses and where they were placed, like the developers ran out of ideas and just took bosses from the early game and reused them and hoped no one would notice because it had been so long, or just hoped you hadn't run into them anyway. The reward variation for bosses and enemies in the mid-game were kind of weird too. I just remember some enemies would drop like 2k runes and were really easy to kill, but others would only drop 300 and they almost killed me. Like, okay. In the later stages of the game, all of the bosses just got cranked up by 2,000, and I have no idea where the shift came from or why they decided it was a good idea to make the player underleveled for all the last boss fights, but it was so annoying, and all the last bosses had the worst imaginable movesets, like, ever, and just playing the last 20 hours of the game was the most frustrating to me because it was just boss after boss after boss with no real progression, and there wasn't anything to do about being underleveled except go grind other things or other places that I didn't want to do, because in the late game there wasn't a lot of extra side content to be doing, so you'd have to go back to one of the earlier stages, and the earlier stages would not give you enough runes to even, like, reasonably try and grind out another level. And at that point, I just wanted to finish the game because it had lost its appeal to me. Like, what? And you know, I thought people were being dramatic and exaggerating about the last half of the game. You know, I was like, once I got to the mountaintops of the giants, I was like, no, I can do it. I don't think it's that bad. And then I was fighting the fire giant, and I was like, oh, this is getting a bit repetitive, isn't it? And then I had to immediately go fight another boss at the crumbling farm area, and then it was the Godskin Duo, which was just horrible design, unfair boss fights. Like, there wasn't any thought put behind some of the boss fights. They just gave them insane movesets and just being ridiculous for no other reason than to be ridiculous and frustrate the player. At least that's what I think was going on. Hey guys, this is me from the future, and I just realized that I had forgotten another point that I was gonna make about the bosses, and it's that I saw a lot of them being reused in the world as just normal enemies. I know the Red Wolf was reused, the Tree Sentinel guy was reused, some like weird hybrid monster thing was reused. Just a bunch of them were reused in the context of being normal enemies, and that definitely also took away from the specialness of the bosses. Just another quick point that I thought I might add. I'm a huge story person. I play video games for the stories that they tell and the characters they create. I can't say Elden Ring has much of a story, but I do know that Souls games aren't exactly story heavy, which is okay. That one I can understand. But it does have lots of lore that you have to go read for yourself and listen to characters talk about to figure out, which isn't bad, it's just not my preferred method of storytelling. I felt like the NPCs that I did encounter on my first playthrough, though, were all unique and interesting with their own personalities and motivations. I couldn't say one character acted or thought just like another character. I could say, though, that half of them are related, and the devs obviously have something for red hair and names that start with M, like Melania, Mikola, Melina, Millicent. Yeah, I see what you did there. I don't know. It confused me. I was like, why are we supposed to like take something away from this? Why do they all have like really similar, like maybe not really similar, but it was like, I don't know, the names and like the faces all just blended for me. It was a bit confusing. The characters made the world more engaging and made me invested in their personal stories. Although I already mentioned how I didn't appreciate that I didn't know where to find any of them, keeping that in mind. I also wish there were more people and that they weren't so spread out. I feel like in a hostile world, all these characters that are, not crazy and want to kill everything in sight would find each other and have connected villages or a way to communicate, maybe, something like that. All the characters that you find, aside from the ones in the Round Table and Volcano Manor, and there's only 4 in the Volcano Manor, and one of them came from the Round Table Hold, so he's not a new character, are just randomly spread throughout the world in the middle of fields of bloodthirsty giant hands, which doesn't make much sense. Now I wanted to touch on the endings really quick, and I was a bit disappointed when I found out there's only 6 and 4 of them are literally the same thing just with a different name. I did do the Ronnie ending because I persevered so hard to beat Estelle. He was probably my most challenging fight in the entire game, and I did fight Melania, but I must have died to him at least 100 times, and I wasn't doing all that for nothing. To be fair, though, I think I was probably a bit underleveled. And that's on me. That's on me. But I was determined. Then I went and watched the other endings on YouTube, and they didn't even get different cinematics. Like, guys, all that work? For that? For nothing? The Frenzy Flame ending was fire, though, pun intended. That one was awesome, but I feel like probably the least rewarding, because if I just went through all that trouble, I just put in all that effort, I would like a better, nicer ending, please. And I would have appreciated a smidge more effort for the endings, since it did take blood, sweat, tears, and cursing my entire bloodline to get there. Regarding the world, I liked that the map was just empty and didn't have any quest markers on it. That felt like a breath of fresh air, because I just finished Assassin's Creed Odyssey before I started playing Elden Ring again. And oh boy, yeah. Don't even need to say anything about that. It just felt good to put markers on the map myself to where I wanted to go, rather than just already having it on there, and it made the map so much easier to look at, nicer to read. I liked that the only thing that you had on there were the sites of grace, because it was nice. It was nice. Even though I've only been talking about the negative experiences I had with Elden Ring, I still think it's an amazing game, and lots of time and effort went into making it the experience that it is, especially the first half of the game. It was really enjoyable. I did like it, and I was very immersed. I've never played a game with so much atmosphere that perfectly displays the dark fantasy setting, and I'm a huge fan of dark fantasy. And there's not really any other games out there like that, except maybe like Baldur's Gate 3. But Baldur's Gate 3 isn't exactly like open world, It's in a different category. The boss design was also absolutely incredible, and I've never seen that many unique and just terrifying to look at bosses in a game ever. There's just no words to describe how epic they were. And after like seeing all of the bosses' cutscenes and them having their own little stuff and their sayings, it is definitely like the most epic power fantasy you could ever find in a video game. My top three bosses have to be Estelle, my number one girl boss Melania, and Malekith. I think those ones were probably like I'm rating them off of like coolness, the way that they look. I love their designs. I also loved the feeling of making progress, especially in the early stages of the game where I felt like I was doing something right because I was able to learn the boss's movesets and just defeating a really hard boss. When I defeated the Elden Beast at the end of the game, that was like the best feeling that I've ever had in the entire world. But I still, again, I was so like frustrated with the rest of the bosses. It always takes away from the experience a little bit, but I was still very joyful, very gleeful nonetheless. Elden Ring is an amazing game, but a flawed one. I did enjoy my experience with it, but it would have been so much more enjoyable without the last one third of the game. Elden Ring is not for the faint-hearted, guys, but if you haven't played it, I do recommend trying it despite all my criticisms, at least for a little bit, because it is definitely a unique experience. And even if you are looking stuff up online for help, you're going to have a unique experience of your own. Do I think Elden Ring is the future of open world games? No, and I don't think it needs to be. Elden Ring, although it's an open world game, is a Souls game first, and I think new upcoming open world games should take aspects from Elden Ring and make them better. Minimal quest markers, interesting side quests, unique environments are all things I want upcoming open world games to do better. And I think the only game that's really come out since Elden Ring that's been like open world has been Starfield, and we all knew Bethesda wasn't gonna do Elden Ring. We knew that. They're never gonna do Elden Ring. So, like, you know, I did not have high hopes or expectations for them. And they did well for Horizon Forbidden West came out what like a month after Elden Ring or something. I don't know. It was one of those cursed release date things again. And their open world was an open world too. But to be fair, Elden Ring, like, you can't change your whole game when immediately after Elden Ring comes out. You know, if you have your game, you have the release date, they were kind of screwed. But perchance, Horizon Forbidden West 3, Horizon Zero Dawn 3 can be better, maybe. Because if I get the same thing again, I'm going to be a bit disappointed. And now that I've played Elden Ring, I don't think I can stand another Assassin's Creed or Starfield. And it was already bad enough after playing Baldur's Gate 3, where I was like, oh, that's a role-playing game. Because it's not like, it's open world, but it's not exactly open world. Like, I definitely wouldn't put Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring in the same category, but they're both amazing games. And now, after playing Elden Ring, I just expect better from AAA studios and $70 games, because I just played two great games within the last year, so I know it is possible. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.